Today, I'm going to head to the field and we are going to do a zinnia tour. I'm going to show you my favorite new varieties that I'm growing this year and what I'm definitely growing next year and what I'm not growing next year. I'm also going to show you some of the zinnia problems I've been having and tell you why those zinnias haven't been doing well. So maybe you can pinpoint what's happening in your garden. Let's go. If you've been around my channel for, a minute, you probably know how much I love zinnias. They are hands down one of my favorite flowers. Number one, because they grow well in my climate. They're native to Colorado. They're native to a lot of the southwestern region of North America. And so they do really well here. Where they don't tend to do as well are places where the humidity is high because they do prefer drier areas. So all that to say, the number one thing that I see is that people growing them in climates that they're not really adapted to, that's where they tend to not do quite as well. But for those of us in dry climates who, by the way, I'm not going to feel bad about you if you can't grow zinnias, because those of us in dry climates struggle with almost everything else because it's so dry. So give us this one thing, okay? Give us our zinnias. Not to say that you can't grow zinnias in more humid climates. It can just be a little bit trickier, and they do tend to get a little bit more disease and things like black spot and funguses. I'm gonna go around because it rained last night. Okay, I'm trying to get to this part of the field, but as you can see, it rained last night and I don't really want to go past that oregano that's all wet. I'm also going to show you how to save your favorite zinnia seeds this year, even if they're still green. I like to do it now because I can tell what they are. Once they've dried, it's a little bit harder to tell. So if you're labeling your zinnias, and you have them very well labeled in your garden, good for you. I'm terrible at labeling everything. So if I wait until these are all brown and dry, I don't usually know what variety they were. So I like to save them now. So if you're in one of those more humid climates, my best recommendation for you is to make sure you're succession seeding. That is, seed some every 3 weeks or so. In my opinion, every 2 weeks is overkill, but every 3 weeks would be a good idea. Here in my zone 5-6, we have a first frost average of mid-October. And for myself, I typically do my last zinnia succession at the beginning of July. And so I wanted to first go over these varieties, and then we're gonna go take a look at the zinnias that aren't doing that well, and I'm gonna tell you why they aren't doing well. These are looking pretty good. We haven't had much fungus in our soil, I would say, for the last few years. The only one I really still get is rust on my snapdragons, but not a ton of powdery mildew anymore. And a lot of that I really think is related to the health of my soil, which is not to say that, powdery mildew, of course, will still happen even in healthy soils. We do get it on our peonies. It is normal to an extent, but the healthier your soil, the less fungus issues you're going to see in general. And that's true here. I mean, you can see, some of these lower leaves are a little bit nibbled and stuff, but for the most part, looking pretty good despite being very densely planted. For my zinnias, personally, I usually do about a 6-inch spacing. I know often people do maybe a 9 or a 1 foot spacing apart. For me, I just find that 6 inches tends to do pretty well. It also makes them a little bit taller because they have to reach a little bit. Now, that to say, they are shorter than normal this year. And I think some of that is varietal. And then some of it is that I just haven't been cutting from them that much. So the more you cut from your zinnias, the more length you're going to get out of them. Let's take a look at the varieties. I'm going to save the one for last that I'm not planting next year. So the first one I'm going to show you is the one that I always plant and I talk about all the time on this channel because I love this one. It is our Queeny Red. And this is a bred variety, and it has this kind of limey center, lots of double ruffled petals, so not just the single zinnias. So when we're looking at zinnias, and I'm talking about singles versus doubles, when we have lots of petals like this, I'm talking about like single zinnias. The singles are these ones that kind of have, one row of petals. This is a single. So one row of petals, not quite as fancy as maybe these multiple ruffled layers. So I do find that when I'm looking at a variety, I like to see, what percentage of them are these ruffled double varieties because I just prefer them more and they sell better for cuts. These ones look a little more generic and not quite as impressive in a vase. So when we step back and look at the queeny reds, there's a lot of, there's still a lot of interesting mix in the colors. So if you just want to make sure everything goes together, you could just plant the queeny reds because you have some that are a little bit more limey, some that are more pinky, some that are being visited by a bumblebee and we'll leave him alone, some that are a little bit more peachy. So there is still variation within this variety. And then you even will get some like this. And some of that's because we do save some of our own seed as well. So we'll talk about that at the end. But in general, this variety for me doesn't tend to have a lot of fungus. Again, some of this is climate related, some of it's soil related. But I always love these ones. I always love the color palette. They're not for everybody because they can have that little bit of a dusty look. And so some people think they look a little bit like they're browning and then they worry that they're not going to look great in the vase, but I don't mind that. The other one I really like, this is Queeny Lemon Peach. And we showed this in our farm tour video. The Queeny Lemon Peach, when we're looking again, I like to step back and kind of look at the varietal as a whole. We do have a lot of this kind of peachier, a little bit lighter in colors. Again, we have kind of a mix. There's some that are more yellow. There are some that are multiple ruffles, some that are peachier. Maybe a little bit higher percentage of these single blooms in the Queeny Lemon Peach than in the Queeny Red, and smaller blooms. So I would say in general, these blooms are a little bit smaller. That doesn't bother me because I do like to have a balance of large and small zinnias. So if you look at this large one next to him, I mean, it's nice to have the variety in a bouquet, right? If you have all large zinnias, it's almost too much. But if you have some large, some small, it's a nice little mix. Let's keep going down the row because I want to show you the next ones, which are the ballerinas. They have nice stem length, a little higher rate of singles with the ballerinas. So, I'm seeing quite a few single layer petals. And sometimes, the percentage of double versus single ruffles has to do with the variety. And sometimes it has to do with the planting method. Zinnias are one that really don't like root disturbance. If their roots are getting disturbed and moved around a lot, especially as seedlings, that's when we tend to see a higher rate of singles. In my experience, okay? It's also just easier to direct seed than to start these inside, transplant them out. I'm not saying that people don't have success with that. I know there are a lot of you that start your zinnias inside. So definitely seeing a higher rate of the singles on these ballerinas. But the colors, at the end, the colors of these ones, I think are pretty, especially if you do a lot of wedding work, or if you're looking for more pastels and pinks. They definitely have quite a few that are a little bit more pastel-y. There are a few that are a little bit darker pink, but in general, absolutely a pink theme. All right, so the next variety from Johnny's that I'm growing is the Aurora. And you'll also see the Aurora, nice long stems. Looks pretty good, fairly fungus-free. There's a little bit down here on this one, but not very much. More than in the Queeny series, but still not bad. To be expected for zinnias, I'd say. And more pinks on the Aurora, but also some oranges. So we kind of have some of these that are a little bit brighter. So once we get into this Aurora series, you can see we've got some more bright oranges, some bright pinks. So definitely a little bit more color variation in that Aurora heading into those oranges and some yellows as well. We do have some fun color, bicolor in here. So loving the Aurora, loving the Ballerina. All right, the last one I'm going to show you is the one that I'm probably not going to grow again, only because I primarily use them for cuts. If I was growing these in a garden, not primarily for cutting and selling, I would still love these zinnias. I'm going to show you what I mean. So this variety, this last one is called the Zinnia Agave. And again, these are bred by Johnny Seeds. And you can see they're actually a cactus zinnia. So it looks like kind of a cactus flower, just like a cactus dahlia, which means that the petals are a little bit longer and thinner and stringier. So you can see what I mean. It looks kind of like a cactus flower. So if we compare this to typical zinnia petals, flat and a little bit wide, the cactus ones are narrow and long. So again, these are really pretty. And the colors, look at the colors of this mix. Again, this is the Zinnia Agave. The colors are phenomenal. So I'll tell you why I'm not going to grow them as a cut. It's because they're this cactus variety. They just tend to not look that great in vases after a couple days, because these petals are more susceptible, I find, to kind of shrinking up a little bit and drying out. Do you have a little bumblebee? That means that they brown a little bit faster for me in a vase. So all of that to say, and then still nice long stems on this one. We have a little bit of some lower leaves that aren't looking so great. That's very typical for zinnias, it's fine. Maybe a little bit more fungus in the Aurora and the Agave than in the queenies. When zinnias first bloom, of course, they're a little bit smaller, like this one, and the stems are a little bit weaker. So we always do that wiggle test, which looks like this. You just grab the base and you kind of go back and forth. You've probably seen this before. If it wiggles like that, it's not ready to harvest, and these seeds are not going to be mature either. However, if we find an older one, obviously this is a great stage for harvesting seeds. So we'll cut this one as a good example, but this one's past when we would harvest it for a cut, right? It doesn't look very good for a cut flower. For seeds, perfect. But here's our like best of both worlds, right? So if we want to harvest for seed and we want to harvest for a vase, what we're looking for is that wiggle test again. But see, when I wiggle this one, how the head stays stiff? That's what we're looking for. So this one is ready to cut for the vase, and we can harvest some seeds from it. So let's go ahead and cut this one. I'm gonna cut nice and far. I always cut far down. That's gonna help encourage long stems. I know it's a little bit painful. I'm gonna go all the way down here. So here's our cut zinnia. You can see how far down I did it. We'll just strip off all these lower leaves. So I'll pull the seeds off of both of these so we can kind of compare. So here we've got our kind of older one, right? This is past harvest stage. The petals have started to brown. What you want to do is, yes, there are some seeds, especially as these age. If you let them totally dry out on the flower, some of these ones up here will have a chance to ripen. Right now you can see that these are not viable. They are fairly translucent. There's no black line embryo inside them. They haven't been able to mature yet. If we go down to the bottom, so where I usually pull them from personally is down here near the base of the petals. So if you grab these bottom petals here and you just gently pull back, these pop off. You have your petal attached to your seeds. And these seeds, you can see, are mostly viable. So you want them to be nice and plump, like this one, with that nice dark line. Ooh, this one I would say is borderline, maybe viable. Yeah, there's a little dark, so probably. And then these three, definitely nice, dark, plump. That's usually what I look for. So you can discard the petal if you want. I usually just dry them and let them dry. And then once they're dry, those petals just pop right off. So we've got some to save here. And then same thing for this one. So this one, of course, those at the top are not even going to be close to being ready. But down here near the base, we'll do the same thing. We'll kind of grab from that underside of the petal, pull back, and those release, and here are your zinnia seeds. So very, very easy. And we'll just lay those on a paper towel to dry. And then I'm gonna store them in a paper bag. So I prefer to store in paper instead of in plastic, just because it helps prevent moisture buildup that could rot your seeds.
Now, one important thing to note when we're talking about saving zinnia seeds is that if you're growing lots of different varieties in one space like I am, then they're going to cross-pollinate. So if you want to make sure that they true stay to parent and that the seeds that you're saving are going to look like the parent, you have to isolate that zinnia. So you can take something like a bag and cover the top of the zinnia before it opens so that it doesn't get cross-pollinated by anything next to it before you save the seed. So that means before it opens, before it blooms, that's when you're covering it. I will often use a little drawstring bag that's made out of maybe a muslin or a gauzy type of fabric, and you just pull that tight over the top again so that it can't get cross-pollinated. Otherwise, you're going to get some kind of an interesting mix between the different varieties that you're growing. Now, if you're only growing one variety, that's not a problem, so you can save those seeds and not worry about isolating.
Okay, so we've harvested our zinnias. We've gone through the varieties, we've gone through the ones that I like and why, and the last thing I want to show you is the ones that don't look great and why that is. So I already mentioned that they don't do particularly well in very humid climates, and if you are in a humid climate, it will help if you space them a little bit more far apart than I do. So maybe go for closer to a 9-inch or a 1-foot spacing just to give them a little more air circulation. But the other thing I want to tell you is that the zinnias don't really like good soil. So you might have seen it in our farm tour that I showed those zinnias that are out front in those planter beds. So those are planted into Coast of Maine and Fox Farms, which is great soil. And zinnias don't like great soil. They kind of want your crappy soil because think of where they're native to. So they are typically native to my area, Colorado, southwestern US. Our soils are not, we're not the Midwest, we're not the Corn Belt, we're not that rich black earth part of the country. We are sandier soil, we are clay soils, we are sometimes both sandy and clay somehow. We are dry and not a lot of precipitation. So think about where they're native, and that is going to play into what they like soil-wise. So that's why these ones back here in the field look so much better than those ones that we have in those planter beds out front because they just don't appreciate that rich soil. Now, the other thing is that you'll remember in our Zinnias 101, we talked about how important it is for those zinnias to have direct sun and lots of it. Again, think about where they're native to. They really want a lot of sun and heat. So let's look at these ones that are also not doing well. You might have seen these in our farm tour. So here we've got our hedgerow of golden currant. Really no berries left. The birds ate all of the golden currant berries. But what you'll see is that here, this is to the east. So sun rises over this way. Nope. So once the sun hits here, these are fairly shaded. And so they're just not performing that well over here. So we did direct seed these. But I mean, number one, they're clearly getting nibbled on a little bit by something. And then number two is that they're just getting too much shade to really thrive. So definitely make sure they're getting lots of sun. Now, one thing I will remind you, and this is in the zinnia growing video, but remember that if you are growing these, you do want to pinch them. So when they're this size or even before, pinch off that top node so that they'll branch from lower down. You could even do it when they're this small. This poor one. You could even do it this small and pinch those off. Really, the earlier the better, I would say. But this soil, gosh, maybe that's it. Maybe that's part of the problem is that hairy vetch cover crop that we had in here that now has formed this mat of weed barrier made our soil too nice for these zinnias. But I guess a testament to cover cropping, so there's that. All right, guys, that's it. I'm gonna stop babbling at you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. I appreciate you all. Thanks for being here.